So I'm Tatiana Ivleva. I'm the organizer of this colloquium and this pop-up exhibition. I've been called, teasingly, hopefully, Tatiana the Terrible. But it's not me who actually have been called that, that exact way, that terrible woman. It's Maud Cunnington who has been called horrible or terrible. Maud was an extremely productive and industrious archaeologist and one of the earliest excavators of the Salisbury Plain or Stonehenge landscape. The legacy of her research, writings, and excavations and the sites that she curated, according to some scholars, actually form the foundational part of the British prehistoric archaeology. Yet this figure is rarely known outside of Wiltshire archaeological circles. And an article on Maud, Julia Roberts, states that her work became dismissed and largely forgotten because of her personality, rather than her inability to produce the solid archaeological research or flawed interpretations of the archaeological sites that she excavated. Maud has been called by respected archaeologists such as Stuart Pigott or Peggy Guido as horrible and terrible. But when they were asked what was so horrible about her, Stuart Pigott merrily recalled her icy blue eyes and icy blue voice. So those of you who have icy blue eyes, please beware. You might not enter the annals of the history. But many other women archaeologists who didn't have icy blue eyes or icy blue voice or a terrible cough like me didn't make the history cut. So let's turn our attention to the subject of this colloquium, Romano-British women archaeologists. But surprisingly, I do not start with them, but I start with this man. I'm sure that about 60% of the audience here would know who these men are without me putting the names to their faces. And if I do put their names, I mean the remaining ones would definitely know who these men were, what their contributions and legacies for the Romano-British archaeology were and what they have left in their books and writings. And I think some of you might want to prefer to call them fathers of Romano-British studies, and maybe in case of Eric Birley, father of the Romano-British frontier studies. So what I would like, so I've been giving this presentation on the topic of women archaeologists and other disciplines, so frontier studies. And what I would like to do sometimes is to talk to ChatGPT about what does it know about some of the early archaeologists. So I've asked ChatGPT to name 3 male archaeologists who have made significant contributions to the study of Roman Britain. And the result is very much in agreement with this slide. So we have Ian Richmond, Shepard Frere, and Eric Birley. When I asked ChatGPT to name the most famous Romano-British archaeologist, ChatGPT has thrown Mortimer Wheeler into the mix. And whether we agree or not with this selection is another matter. But these are all that names are familiar to us, especially for those who do Romano-British archaeology, so there's nothing unusual here. But when I ask the very same question about women archaeologists, this is where the whole fun part begins. So as someone who studies Roman frontiers and Roman frontier material culture, I was really curious about Sheila L. Perry. There are a few frontier archaeologists here, Frances, David, Matt. Did you heard about Sheila L. Perry? I didn't either. But ChatGPT actually tells us that Perry was one of the foremost scholars in the study of Roman military sites, particularly focusing on the Roman frontier in Britain. She worked on excavations at sites like Hadrian's Wall, studying military fortifications, civilian settlements, and interactions between the Roman and local population. The other two women, and Shayla L. Perry, actually have never existed. This is what, you can actually try Google them during a coffee break, or if you're bored with my talk, and see whether this woman indeed exists. Diana Briscoe exists, but she has no connection to Silchester whatsoever. So this is what is known as ChatGPT hallucination, where AI model generates incorrect information, but presents it as a real fact. And I've done this before on other women archaeologists in other disciplines, and ChatGPT has no problem in naming male archaeologists, but it did very often hallucinate and imagined women. So Laura Bates, in her new book, The New Age of Sexism, she does a very similar exercise to me. So she asked AI generative platforms for some specific examples of women in history in various different situations, and they repeatedly provided detailed responses that sounded convincing. But upon further investigation with other sources proved to be either entirely invented or fabricated. But it is not AI or ChatGPT to blame for this misinformation. They are not deliberately trained to be this way. So AI trains and feeds on the information which is available as an open source. So it will consume only what is available. And if information available has already inherent bias, so it will produce a biased, and in our case, gendered bias response in return. So this exercise with ChatGPT is like looking into the mirror, because male archaeologists are all known, they all existed, we all know who they were, but while the real women archaeologists have been erased. And this is some of them. So these are the real women. All of them are subject of this pop-up exhibition. Those of you who are connected to the Roman society might recognize a few of them, but possibly you will only know them by their name. So because it's their names that are more prominent than their portraits. And I will return to the subject of the exhibition and also to other efforts to position women archaeologists in the spotlight. I will talk a little bit about it briefly at the end of this talk. But for now, I would like to tackle the question of this opening talk, why we need historiography of women archaeologists in Romano-British studies and beyond. And the very simple answer to this is actually that we need to stop hallucinating the history of the discipline where women have not been present until very recently, in the same way as ChatGPT hallucinated and imagined female archaeologists and their biographies. It is frequently thought that the early days of archaeology was mostly male-centered and there was little representation of female archaeologists. However, a handful of studies and an exhibition have shown that women have always been part of the classical and Roman archaeology discipline as early as mid-19th century. And according to Marie-Louise Stig-Sorensen, the history of women's participation in archaeology has suffered, quote, from a mythologized version of the history of discipline where women have not been present until very recently, end of quote. Furthermore, Rachel Pope and Mary Davis, when writing about a British prehistorian, Peggy Piggott, have concluded that, quote, the historical reality of 1930s Britain, the time when Peggy Piggott was active in archaeology, was such that a young, wealthy woman have seen equal access to archaeology, garnering both professional and public respect, end of quote. So female archaeologists have been involved in archaeology since the early days of the discipline, were very well known at the time and very well respected, and have played a significant role in development of the discipline. Yet, despite their achievements, they're largely forgotten and also very elusive. Why? And one explanation in the disappearance can be sought in the specialism of many of them in different aspects of artifact studies or working for museums as opposed to the university. So if you look at some of the careers of the heroines of this exhibition and this colloquium, we see that this also applies to them. So, for example, Grace Simpson, Frances will put Grace Simpson in much broader context after the tea break. But Grace Simpson, so this is Grace. Grace Simpson is largely known amongst pottery and material culture specialists for her pioneering work on Central Gaulish potters, and this work still remains a key reference. Joycelyn Toynbee, her key expertise was Roman art, and she published extensively on the topics of sculpture, coins, medals, paintings, mosaics, gemstones, and metalwork, and a lot more. Her seminal book still remains Art in Roman Britain. Then Anna Robertson, this is her. She worked for a Hunterian museum in Glasgow. She published in artifacts and coins, and she also excavated a range of sites in Scotland from various chronological periods. And a number of these sites were on the Antonine Wall, which resulted in her publishing her first handbook to the monument in 1960s. And this handbook is still being reprinted and in its 6th edition. So why this decision to focus on material culture and art? And I'm working on the topic of women archaeologists from Romano-British circles and Roman frontier studies. So I'm working on this topic together with Rebecca Jones, the head of collections at the National Museum of Scotland. And together with Becky, we've interviewed a few women in Roman frontier studies who studied their academic career in 60s and 70s. And one of these interviewees was Carol van Driel-Murray, who initiated a novel research line in the 90s on the female presence in Roman military forts. And she told us that the decision to become artifact specialist was a way out of male dominance and being able to publish without being judged for their gender or being questioned for this or criticized. So she told us this was a field where one could produce own work and express own opinions as they fell outside male-dominated strategic studies or theoretical approaches. But despite publishing on the topic of material culture, their work was much more likely to be known by other artifact specialists rather than by the entire archaeological community. An additional barrier to recognition of women contributing to their invisibility is this unconscious practice of writing themselves out of the disciplinary past. And we see this pattern with many early women who stood in the shadow of great men with whom they have worked. So, for example, Martha Stewart will talk about M.V. Taylor, but I just briefly cover a little bit, leaving it all to you to talk more about Miss Taylor. So she worked as an assistant to Francis Haverfeld, but despite his death in 1919, Taylor's career remained largely entwined in his, partly due to her ongoing administrative duties towards Haverfeld bequest. She's very well known within the circles of Roman society, but outside of Roman society, she is largely forgotten. Apologies to Frances, Grace Simpson again. So Grace Simpson, she was also a honorary curator of Clayton Collection at the Chester's Roman Fort of Hadrian's Wall for nearly 20 years. But despite her association with Hadrian's Wall, she is largely referred to Hadrian's Wall in relation to her father, F. Gerald Simpson. Frances will put this into more context. But what I want to say, so Grace wrote some of her father's excavations, like the one on the screen, water mills and military works on Hadrian's Wall. And in many ways, she saw herself as a custodian of his legacy, perhaps in a similar manner to Taylor's approach to Haverfeld. Another reason why this woman might not have been better known is the publishing practice in local rather than national journals. So we have here Kate Hodgson. She's not yet the heroine of this pop-up exhibition, but she will be, I promise. But she was the daughter of Elizabeth Hodgson, and David will talk about her mother, Elizabeth, after the tea break. Kate also followed in the footsteps of her mother, but she was actually more prolific. She was actually the first male president of the Cumberland and Westmoreland Antiquarian and Archaeological Society. She undertook a lot of excavations, published a huge number of excavation reports, but all published. So this is just a screenshot of her publications from Wikipedia. But the whole published in this local journal, Transactions of Archaeological Society, which she was president of. But she is not widely known in British or Roman archaeology circles, despite producing so much work. Kate Hodgson's obituary in Times said she was the most modest of people and would never regard herself as more than a humble worker in her chosen field. Carol van Driel-Muir, in our interview, has expressed extremely similar sentiment without knowing what has been written about Kate. She says that female scholars that she knew were also very modest and just got on with the job. And in our world, that means no one notices what you are doing, let alone gives you credit for it. Not all were very modest, however. Some of the women, such as Grace Simpson and Anna Robertson, have gained a reputation for being difficult. Again, Frances apologies. Last quote about Grace, but I thought it was very nicely stands in the contrast to what Carol said and what was said about Kate. So Grace wrote a note to herself after a particular meeting saying that I was not rude at the meeting, but I was very firm. And when a woman is firm, then often men imagine that she's being rude. It is possible that in order to be taken seriously, difficult women had to stand up for themselves, their knowledge and beliefs in a manner that was deemed unacceptable for their gender. And while being present and loud might earn a woman a title of being difficult, authoritative, or Tatiana the Terrible, being modest and quiet might result in one's contribution considered insignificant. But whatever you do as a woman, it might result in being written out. Please don't forget the icy blue eyes too, and the icy blue voice. So there are, of course, other many reasons why women have been under-recognized. This all intersects with the previous slides. It also intersects with the marriage and family effects. So women academics were, for example, expected to step from the position upon marriage. But what is most likely to underpin all those reasons for the erasure and invisibility in the history of women archaeologists is the so-called Matilda effect. Margarita Diaz-Andrew assesses how in the history of archaeology, women's roles have been very frequently trivialized and even silenced. The name Matilda effect is a paraphrase of a term that refers to the cumulative effect of recognition. And this phenomenon suggests that those who are already well known will receive more attention, leading to cumulative credit. In contrast, those at the other end will experience the opposite by being extremely under-recognized. According to Matilda effect, so those who are in the spotlight will continue to enjoy the spotlight. Those in the shadows will disappear. Or as Margaret Roots puts in her 2004 paper, one omission in scholarship perpetuates further omissions. And this is what happened also with ChatGPT, hallucinations, and erasures. So to challenge the status quo, we need more studies focusing on women ideas and their impact on the knowledge formation in archaeology. And these are just some various volumes, a selection. That's not all that is available. That just didn't fit on the slide. So there are various volumes that have appeared in the last 3 decades that pay tribute to early women archaeologists, excavators, and researchers in different disciplines, chronological periods, all with the aim to reinstate their work and make their contributions to an impact on archaeology more visible. If we talk about digital humanities initiatives, so there are a handful of them online that write women back into the history of archaeology discipline. Some of you might know with the Travels Blazes project, dedicated to increasing the visibility of women in archaeological science. ACT-ARC, it's a German 3-year project which focuses on biographies of female German archaeologists. And another project, Beyond Notability, Amara will talk about it after the coffee break and introduce a little bit about the project and walk us through how this database can be accessed, what kind of information can be derived from this. So this brings us to the topic of this colloquium and this pop-up exhibition, which actually stands on the shoulders of the giants because there's so much already available there, but ChatGPT is refusing to take this information and learn. So as part of this colloquium, during the tea break and reception, you're more than welcome to view some of the materials which are associated with women archaeologists. They're lying at the table at the back. Some of them are books, the first or second editions of the books which have been written by the women archaeologists, the heroines of this colloquium and this pop-up exhibition. You're very welcome to browse them as long as you don't take them away. They're not for sale, they're my own. There will be only one book for sale after the tea break. It's a book about biography of Brenda Haywood, because the author will come after the tea break with 10 exemplars, and you're more than welcome to purchase the book. So only one can be bought. All other ones, please don't. What I've also done, I've printed some of the watercolors by some of the women archaeologists. So there are watercolors by so this is just one printed watercolors by Jessie Mothersole, who did a pilgrimage to Hadrian's Wall in the 1920s. While she was doing it, she made this wonderful watercolors as her books, and some of the watercolors printed. They lie on the table. I've also printed some of the drawings by Elizabeth Hodgson. David will talk about Elizabeth after the tea break, but you're more than welcome to come and look at her drawings. So the drawings of her excavations together with Francis Haverfield, whom she didn't like. So I thought it was very nice dynamic. Envy Taylor adored Francis Haverfield. Elizabeth despised him. David possibly will talk about it in his talk. So this is some of the printed drawings from her portfolio. They're extremely detailed, they're very beautiful, and like every archaeology heart starts pumping very quickly when you see them, because they have an extreme detail to them. During the colloquium, you can also view the 11 banners. So this is the introduction to the exhibition, but all of the banners about the women at the back. So there's 11 of them. And after the colloquium, these banners will be moved to the library, and they can be viewed there for some time. Also, in the foyer of the library, there is a small exhibition in the glass cases, which I put up yesterday, and it contains some archival material, books, and photographs which are associated with some of our heroines. So if during the coffee break you have no one to talk to, more than welcome to go freestyle up and look at this small exhibition. You can ask me why there are only 11 of them. There are more. There is much more. I have a whole list of them. But the answer to the why this 11, it's very simple. It's actually the availability of those who can write about them, who produce the text. But I will add a few more. So there should be one on Aileen Fox, who excavated in Exeter, and of course about Kate Hodgson, because I thought it was very interesting to have a banner on mother, but not on the daughter. So there will be something on Kate. Okay, I hope you enjoy this colloquium, the viewing the material, and the exhibition. Thank you very much.